So our next speaker, as you may be able to see, is Ciaran Dynes, who is from Talend. Now, Ciaran is going to be taking a particularly interesting topic. So he's going to be exploring how a lack of trust in data can cause you real problems and what you can do to reinstate that trust in your data. And I'm sure that that will be of interest to everyone, because if you can't trust your data, then ultimately the insights that come from it, you can't trust those, and it's going to be very, very difficult to actually extract anything meaningful and valuable from that data. So I think this is going to be a really, really interesting talk. And I'm sure you'll have questions. Once again, you can submit those into the Q&A module. You don't need to wait until the end. You can put them in as you think of them. But without any further ado, I will hand straight over to Ciaran.
Super, James. Can you hear me? Just to make sure I got the audio working.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. Great. Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. Hope you're having a good day. I'm going to talk a lot today about data. I'm going to talk a lot about how we feel that data is driving a huge amount of innovation. I'm Ciaran Dynes. I run products at Talend. So between me and my team, we're responsible for the design of the products, the strategy, and the vision. And we get a lot of time with customers. We spend a fair bit of time with seeing some of the best data projects out there. Now, it's not a whole sort of happiness. I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of the challenges and some of the challenges that some customers and some people basically run into with data. But I'm also going to talk a lot about some of the customers that work with Talend and how they're approaching data in a new way. And that new way really focuses in on what we call trusting the data. Now, we think for many, many years, every single exec in an organization has had the opportunity to track a number. So if you think about the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, is able to track things like revenue, or marketing is able to track pipeline, or the head of sales is tracking, the forecast. We've never really been able to track the quality of data in general in companies. We've had initiatives around data quality, and people can talk to the successes about fixing their data and deduping their data. We've never had a single number that might be auto-calculated, auto-computed, and something that the business and IT could sit down with each other and discuss and say, if the data that we're using for an initiative, a new business that we're going into, a new location or geography we're going to launch in, can we all at least agree that the data we're basing those decisions on is something that we can trust? So I'm going to talk a lot about that concept and how that's been one of the real leading factors for a number of the Talend customers being very successful with their digital initiatives over the last year or so. I'm going to kick it off with a company that's Target. I'm sure Target's well known to many, many people. And it was interesting when I was reflecting upon this recent study. It's actually come out in 2019 about Target's entry into the Canadian market. Now, this is not a great outcome. It's well documented online in terms of what happened at Target. But Target had made no secret of the fact that they wanted to enter into the Canadian market roughly around 2011 or so. And they acquired a company, and then the whole idea was they were going to invest in Canada. As we know, Canada and US are somewhat similar. They have the same English language base. Some things are kind of similar, maybe in terms of propensity to buy and those things. But kind of the project came off the rails very, very quickly. So much so that Target had to exit the Canadian market within about a 2-year period. And a big write-down of multiple billions of dollars. Actually, quite a lot of people lost their jobs as a result of this exit that Target had in terms of exiting Canada. But as I was doing the research on this, I was kind of troubled by something, because I remember about 8 years or so ago presenting about Target. Now, if anybody remembers the initial kind of big data use cases that everybody used as examples of why new types of analytics would create this massive global economy, you may remember Target being one of those lighthouse examples. The example was to do with how a certain guy, a parent living in the US, he heard about his daughter's pregnancy because Target sent him a congratulations note. And I'm sure you all know the urban myth and the legend of this particular Target use case. But that was in 2011. So something went wrong with the Canadian venture for Target. So what was it? What went wrong was data accuracy. So as you may know, in America, they use the imperial system. Everything is measured in inches and miles. Well, in Canada, they don't. They actually measure things in centimeters and kilometers, and they use the metric system. And what was ending up happening was the simple stocking of produce on or inventory on the shelves was completely out of whack, because Target was using their US IT infrastructure to run their Canadian operations. So they took the applications, they moved them into a Canadian data center, but nobody thought to basically look at things like the data they were using. Had anybody looked at the units of measure? Actually, it was so bad that even things like the currency, US dollar versus Canadian dollar, and the fluctuation of the dollar actually ended up having a very profound implication on the balance sheet. So what's interesting about this use case is a company that was the lighthouse poster child for big data in 2011 was actually suffering a major data problem in 2012 in another part of their business. And a lot of it came down to data quality issues. So quite often we can have the right data, we can have timely data, but there may be other attributes of the data that basically are not understood fully. And in this instance, it was to do with the units, the specific context for being in the Canadian jurisdiction, not in the US jurisdiction, that really led to this spectacular favor. So much so that actually you'd walk into the Target store and very little inventory was actually on the shelves. So as I said, some of this is about that reality check about, do you trust the data that you're using to make decisions? And trust is not always about some of those most basic things of, is the data complete? Does it have, duplicate data in there? Sometimes it's actually about the data that I'm using to make decisions. Has anybody checked to see, are these things in inches? Are these things in centimeters? Are these things in US dollars? Are these things in Canadian dollars? And those things really matter, and they really matter so much more than ever before as we digitize the entire global economy. Now, to turn to a really great example of a very successful company is Domino's. Domino's describes themselves today as a tech company that happens to make pizza. Now, again, if you look at the story of Domino's, they started over 10 years ago to invest in three things. As you might expect, a food company would most definitely invest in the quality of their product, improving the pizza, making sure it was consistent in every location throughout the world, making sure they really understood, where to get the best produce for their product that they were building and delivering for their customers. That's an obvious one. They also invested in geo expansion. And lastly, they invested in digital. And the digital has been the thing that basically has proven time and time again to be the most competitive key asset that Domino's has built up. So much so that their geolocation expansion is so accurate in terms of where they should place a Domino's franchise within a location, within a town, within a city, like which street should it be on. That's all based on the data that they're collecting. And they collect literally 80,000 store point of sale information on a day-to-day basis. And they analyze that every single day, every single night, and they release that trending behavior back out to their franchisees. So it's a real successful business based a lot on that digitization of the business. Now, if you've looked recently during the COVID times and you've tracked Domino's, we do at Talend because they're a really, really big success story of us, and we work a lot with them. They've released a bunch of new things in COVID. They've been able to do things like deliver a pizza with a kind of a contactless or no-touch ability. Now, ordinarily you might say as well, okay, interesting. But what's interesting about Domino's is the speed by which they can just turn on a dime and change their business processes. This is a global company, multi-billion-dollar company, and they can roll out that new delivery system everywhere, literally overnight. Now, that's easier said than done. It's easy maybe for a single operation, single country. We tried to do that globally during COVID, which is what they've done. That's pretty spectacular, and it all comes down to their data. Now, if you're online right now, which I'm sure you are because you're listening to me, you might just stick in Domino's share price into your browser and have a quick look. And just look at their year-to-date share price performance, and then look year-over-year share price performance. And just for kicks, want to try something different, compare their share price against Google, Facebook, and all the kind of typical social success stories, social media success stories, and just see the trajectory and the value that company creates. And it's all down to really using data at the heart of what they do. So again, a tech company that happens to deliver pizza, one of our key customers, but the real insights I'm going to share a little bit more in a second is that they've focused very heavily on the technologies they use, the way the processes in their company work, and then they look also how the people and how the culture has changed and how they use data across their entire organization. So it's hard. There's a lot of what we call data chaos out there, and it makes innovating very, very difficult. And there's really 4 kind of key data points I would share with you. The first one is really that today the number of data sources is just proving very problematic. On average, most organizations that we deal with today have at least 400 different data sources that they're constantly aggregating, constantly ingesting, constantly loading into the business. So that's problematic. It's a technically challenging thing to do, albeit we think with cloud technologies, we certainly can solve the scale issue, but it's certainly complex. And it doesn't get into the complexity of data changing every day or the schema of the data changing. All those things are things that can basically derail what is ordinarily a really good data project, but the simple changes in the data every day can really make it very, very complex. The next one I think is probably more at issue for a lot of companies, and it's the looking at the bad data or data quality. A piece of this is to do with things like governance and regulation and compliance. So certainly things like if you've got gaps in your data, is your data complete? There are a range of data quality issues. But then the rights to use. Do you have the right to contact a customer? Those things are also having major implications, and you can kind of bucket those in the area of bad data as well. And they're having a really profound influence on how successful people can be with their digital projects. And then lastly, you kind of look at the last 2, you think about the rise of shadow IT, where the people who are using the data simply are trying to get their day job done. And maybe they cannot wait in IT. And what's happening is you're seeing a huge proliferation of different tools, different people in the organization trying to use the data to solve their problems. And it's leading to this kind of huge problem, and sometimes an unforeseen issue of just, trillions and trillions of dollars of wasted time, wasted, bad decisions based on bad data, where people are simply trying to get the job done, but unfortunately they're basing that on top of data that you really shouldn't be trusting that way. And what it's leading to then is a massive number of failed projects. Right now, we estimate that about 45% of transformational projects are actually failing year over year. That's not a great result. So the question is, how do we tip that? How do we tip that in our favor, and how do we basically correct it? So before we go any further, I'd love to get a little bit of feedback. How many data sources are you seeing in your organization? So we've given pretty big gross numbers here to kind of give a sense of what people are seeing. So people wouldn't mind basically, at least beginning to answer that. And the second follow-on question is, how do you think about that data? Do you trust the data that you use within your organization? So as I think about this, I even think about what we do at Talend. We have undertaken a lot of data transformation projects within the last number of years as a company. Focus a lot on sales and marketing data, but increasingly we're looking also at product telemetry. How are people using the product? What are they connecting to? Are they running into operational issues? Can we pre-detect those operational issues, and could we be a little bit smarter in terms of how we, scale up the number of resources to avoid those type of things. So we're starting to use a lot more data in the Talend business, but we also ask ourselves the same question. Can we actually trust the data that we're using as we're making these decisions? So one of the big things, of course, we run into is so much of this is down to people and culture. IDC has recently published a number of reports on the next generation of data worker, the next generation of school leavers, college leavers that are going to be entering our workplace. Now, if you think about these people, they're typically going to be the ages of 20 years of age to 25 years of age, entering into the enterprise in the next couple of years. And they've grown up in a world where, Google or Alexa or Siri were basically the people that they threw a question at or asked for a task to be completed. So their expectations are going to be very much around them doing work themselves, pretty autonomous. They'll want to be able to use the data to drive their own analytics. And they probably really don't want to be opening up an IT ticket every single time they want to get a new data set. So their expectations are going to be really, really high. And as organizations strive to become more digital, it's going to be a real test as to whether or not their culture and their IT systems can meet each other in the middle. So many companies right now are really struggling with this, and it's estimated about 60% of them really aren't realizing this kind of dream of being a data-driven company. So there's definitely a lack of trust in the data today, and it really is a hidden cost. Now, again, I don't want to paint a picture. This is not a problem that we can solve. I think the problem can be solved, and it's really bringing together the best of technology, understanding the processes that we currently have to operate within today, including compliance, and then looking at the culture, the way that our businesses operate and how we use our resources to the best of our ability. So a question for you is just, do these challenges sound familiar to you? And I'd hope that they do. Hopefully there are things that we can address together, but certainly these are challenges that I think every organization could recognize. So it's time to kind of figure out how do we begin to address these things? How do we begin to kind of break this massive problem down into smaller compartmentalized chunks? What type of technologies can we apply to this problem? And how do we know that we're actually achieving a certain amount of success? Now, 3 quick examples of companies that are people that we publicly reference on Talend, so you can definitely get more information about them. L'Oreal is a massive global brand. I'm sure everybody is familiar with the cosmetics and all the kind of various different kind of products that they produce. They have tens of thousands of products, as I'm sure you're all aware. You see it in every store that you walk into. You see them across every airport that you walk into. But they're a very, very science-orientated company. A lot of what they're doing is research. They're researching the next skincare product, the next nail, face, whatever the product may be, hair products. So much of the business is behind the scenes doing real deep research. And the things that they've been able to achieve over the recent times with simply improving the overall quality of their data, that their data systems, they're now using upwards of about 400 researchers every single day working on multi-billion-dollar products. And they've taken the way that they're able to get the evaluation of the product down from a 2-day test down to 1 hour. Now, if you think about that in terms of what that's able to do for their business, it really transforms the ability of them to quickly bring new product to market, quickly exit some products as well that are not performing, because they have this super optimized way of getting information through an organization. But to do that, they have to basically be able to trust the information that they're basing everything on. So from the toxicologists who are doing the test right the way through to the beauty pageant of somebody wearing that product, they're trying to shorten that time down as much as they possibly can, such that they can basically be lean and really on top of their business. Second customer is quite different. It's Covanta. Covanta basically is an energy company. They take waste products and they convert them into energy. Their big thing is that they're trying to basically reduce the amount of time it takes to convert waste product into energy and do that in the safest possible way. And they need a lot of data. They have a huge amount of regulatory compliance in terms of what they have to operate within. And they have a massive, massive safety organization because they're dealing, as you might imagine, with sometimes pretty toxic products. They could be dealing with mercury, they could be dealing with lead, they could be dealing with a lot of things that ordinarily we would call those nasties. But they have to make sure that their workers are, utmost safety, in terms of their day-to-day, and making sure they have really good live data, anything from using IoT information to the types of sensors they have within their facilities, to make sure that they're protecting and keeping their workers very, very safe. So again, very different type of use case, but the innovations that they're applying here is really looking at efficiency. How can they bring together new types of data sources such that they can really optimize the ability to take in waste and produce energy, do it in a safe and efficient way? Lastly, a very different use case again. You may not be familiar with UNOS. UNOS is a US-based organization that looks after transplants. Obviously not, some ways the happiest thing to kind of consider or think about, but obviously the situation where, somebody has died and there's an opportunity to pass their organs on to a donor. The better we can make that success, and the better we can find a better match for those patients, then, it's going to lead to a huge life-changing outcome for the person who's obviously receiving those organs. And UNOS's job and the way they see their role is to try to get the highest degree of matching that they possibly can. And, again, obviously there is a person who's donating their organs, and that's certainly a sad part of that story. But the life-changing aspect of that is how can they make sure that those organs can be received by the best and most accurate and most appropriate recipient. And they've taken that the time down from about 18 hours down to literally a swipe, where they can track which surgeon, where that surgeon is, and where the actual organ needs to be delivered to. It's a fantastic, great insight into how data can be used for something so positive, so good, for something that we couldn't do years and years ago. So it's a very interesting use case, again, about how they can apply innovation to something that is basically so profound in providing organs from a patient to a recipient. So we think that the trusted data can only be applied or brought together by unifying our approach to technology, processes, and people. And we think the technology part today is largely through the new technologies in the cloud. So something that I think, if done the right way, is certainly achievable. Processes are definitely, an emerging kind of set of things. We're not talking here about workflow. We're not talking about the typical things that you would see in ETL. We're talking about the newer things. You're talking about how do you use data and be compliant with things like GDPR or CCPA. Those things are processes, and they're kind of over and above what you normally would expect to see in terms of how people manage data, but they're crucial. They're crucial that you get those right as you think about how you can use data and how potentially those processes could limit your innovation. And then lastly, people. It's definitely the case that the newer workers entering the workforce have a much more familiarity in the use of data, much more familiarity in the use of technology, and they're also culturally looking to basically do things for themselves. This is self-evident. It's been well basically understood. So bringing these three things together is really, really important. Now, at Talend, to say just two quick, simple examples. Over the last year, we've been bringing technology people together. We have a fully automated system. We extract a lot of our Salesforce data. We pass it over to stewards in an automated fashion, and the stewards are making decisions about whether the data that we have about a particular customer is accurate or not accurate. But the way we're combining the technology is every time a steward makes a decision, we're looking to use that decision as a way then to automate the next time new data arrives. So it's kind of bringing together both the technology, bringing together a process, and also bringing together people, because the people are very, very good at understanding when something is right and accurate and something is incorrect. The other one is on our marketing side. One of the things that has been changing due to regulation and due to the way we have a different business behavior, we want to target the advertising, the ads, the contacts that we have with our new prospects and customers in a much more smart way. So we don't just do a blanket email. We want to make sure if we're targeting a CIO or we're targeting an engineer or an architect that we use very, very different language to those. So again, we've been using a lot of machine learning built into the Talend capabilities that really automate this entire process. And the idea is by doing that, we can have a much, much more customer-oriented outcome and have that person react in a very different way unless unless we were using just a more bland kind of marketing approach. So the key thing then is looking at this trusted data. And do you trust the different data sets within your enterprise? And it's not a one size fits all. One of the key things looking here is that there are different executives in your organization that rely on different types of data. And so much so that even if you look at some of the applications you use today, things like CRM is not one type of data. You can subdivide CRM data into contact information. You can subdivide it into invoicing. In some cases, you may even subdivide it into accounting. Depending on the way you're basically using your CRM, you will basically look at different parts of that data set, and different executives will have a need for different parts of that information to be more accurate. But what's clear is the CRO is very interested in sales forecast information. CFO, very interested in things like revenue or ARR. Chief Marketing Officer looking at pipeline. What's our pipeline looking between now and the end of the year? HR might be looking at onboarding, offboarding of new employees or contractors. So there's different data in the organization. And the different data can have different ways that you manage it and different ways of knowing whether or not the data is accurate or inaccurate within your company. So much so that Talend believes that we need to solve this problem. We want to define a standard, and a standard by which we can measure the ability for you to trust the decisions and the way that you're using data. So if you think about COVID right now, you think about data being thorough. Is it clean and is it complete? Now, if you looked at a lot of the COVID kind of analysis and reports over the last couple of weeks, you kind of getting to probably a much more comfort level in terms of trusting where you get your information from. Think back to March, where certainly in Europe and certainly in Ireland, COVID was only really beginning to start. And you were kind of scrambling for some of the information. You were looking at government websites. You were looking at various different kind of international websites just to get a sense for what was going on. And then the kind of inevitable question came up is the data clean? Because if you looked at the data, it was like, well, can we trust the fact that the information is what it says? Are the age profiles for who is getting COVID and who's going to the intensive care unit, can those be trusted? And then is it complete? Do we have a full picture of what's going on? Are we just looking at hospitals? Are we looking at, healthcare, elderly homes, or both? And those things mattered a lot as we were thinking about COVID. So clean and complete, really, really important. Is things timely? Again, with COVID, you want to know on a day-to-day basis whether or not the numbers are increasing or decreasing, certainly in your own geography. That's really, really important. So having readily available, timely data is another aspect as you think about having something that you can trust. Is it transparent? Do you know that I can get access to the data? Is it public? Or is it it's difficult to get there? I have to go through so many loops and jumps and hoops to get to the information? Or is it readily accessible such that I can basically, again, begin to trust it, use the information as I choose, and basically I can, then do things for myself? Has it been certified? If you get the data from your government or John Hopkins or whatever it is, is it certified by a physician? Is it certified by some, government authority? Again, those things, if you translate your own company, has your finance department approved that Excel document and those finance numbers for use? And then you look at traceable. Do we know where the information has come from, and has it come from an identifiable source? And that becomes crucial. Over time, you want to make sure that in the case of COVID, it's coming from somewhere that you trust and In the case of enterprise data, you want to look at emails and kind of go, okay, do I trust emails that come from the Salesforce system? Do I trust emails that come from our e-commerce system? And that might be a different answer depending on which organization you're in. It wouldn't be the first time you've ever seen Mickey Mouse at Disney.com as a way somebody registers for a trial or a PDF or a newsletter that you download. So maybe the data in certain applications that you're using, you trust it more because you know where it's coming from. So really important, these kind of 5 key things that go into defining the standard way of looking at trust. Now, we've been working very hard on this problem at Talend, and we've encapsulated the trust score into our platform. So right now, you can go and you can try this out. And we're going to be launching a number of things in the coming weeks, whereby you can load your data, and you can start to understand, this trust score. And we're only at the beginning. what we're looking to do is not just look at trust as a thing of data quality. It's also to look at social curation. Who has approved this data within your company? Can we apply things like, how many times somebody has consumed and used it as a way to improve the weighted average? And all of these things add up to those key things, as I said. If you think back at Target, they had a spectacular success, as I mentioned, being the poster child for big data, and also a significant failure. And both of those two things relied on data. So it was nothing to do with the culture of the company, nothing to do with the availability of data. It was to do with some specific attributes that only later on that people realized that there's more to trusting the data than simply having available data. It's got to be accurate, it's got to be context aware, and you really got to know how to use it properly. So, James, love to get some questions and kind of continue the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, firstly, thank you very much, Ciaran. I thought that was a really, really interesting presentation, and some interesting nuggets and case studies as well around the beginning and the presentation. Lots of information that was very useful. So I will kick off with a question, as I always do. But audience, if you would like to get your questions in, you know how to do it by now. Just put them in that bottom box, hit enter, and they'll come through to us, and we'll get as many of those through to Ciaran as we possibly can in our time. So the first question that I wanted to ask really was just around that last piece around the score, the Talend Trust score that you can apply to data. In terms of kind of how you actually do that and the methodology you use and the weighting, can you give us an insight into what kind of goes into it's so neat being able to give it one neat score that summarizes it all up. I love that idea, but if you could maybe give us the audience a little bit of an idea around exactly how you boil down all those different components, the 5 factors, and how often someone's using it, all those different elements, and boil it down to that one simple score, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, a piece of this is, as you might expect, it's going to be a little bit of sensitivity in terms of what I'll expose, but certainly there's a couple of things. There's the notion of validity. So you can use a lot of smarts in data quality to simply look at data sets and run a bunch of algorithms on it, and you can come up with a sense for, is the data valid? Now, valid might mean, is the postcode a UK postcode? They're all well understood things in the UK. There's valid postcodes and invalid postcodes. So you can do things like that. Is the data valid? That's kind of a key one that you kind of start with. And what's interesting is that validity is not, shouldn't be seen as just a, if column A is valid, column B is valid, column C is valid, that you kind of add them all up. It's not. So if I said to you, James, I've given you here's a contact database list to do your next email campaign, and you might look at it and go, okay, there's 30, 40 fields in here between addresses and emails and phone numbers and things. And maybe some of it is invalid, and you kind of go, all right, well, 5% of the data is not usable. What if I then said, the address information is not good, the first names are wrong, the date of births are wrong? After a while, your confidence in that data starts to slip, and you kind of go, well, if all that's wrong, guys, how do you trust the email address? So actually, validity is an interesting thing. It's more than just the sum of the parts. It's actually cumulative. It actually has an exponential way of calculating validity. It's very, very interesting to see when you give data sets to people, if they kind of look at things being, valid, then something slightly off, they kind of go and say, it's just slightly off, and we can fix that. It's okay. But as you basically undermine their confidence in a piece of data, it doesn't matter that I can convince you that the email addresses are accurate. At that point, you're like, come back to me when you fixed it. So that's the first thing. The other part is completeness. I think COVID is a brilliant example, unfortunately, to talk about completeness. If you look at different countries in terms of how they track COVID, some governments only consider something to be a COVID case if it's been certified by a physician, by a doctor. Now, you and I know that that's just never going to be the case. There's going to be a number of people, the factors that you kind of look at it and go, this person definitely got COVID. Potentially, you've got a bunch of people who have died due to COVID, but they kind of say, well, it was pneumonia or it was a chest infection or something else. But what's interesting about that is if you wanted a complete picture of COVID, you would maybe want the doctors or your government or local government to kind of go, can we reclassify some of these? Because the propensity for us, the probability of somebody having COVID in this nursing home, we're pretty damn certain because, 3 or 4 other people had the same. So completeness is really, really important, that you're actually looking at an end-to-end picture of everything. Then we look at social curation. It's definitely the case that nowadays we have much bigger opportunity to use the human factor as a way to sort of understand that data has been approved. This is a really interesting aspect of this because depending on who you are, if you're a business analyst in finance, you really want, supremely complete and valid data. And that's true because you're probably doing financial accounting and reporting. If you're a data scientist, not so much. Data scientists sometimes only need specific attributes of the data to be valid because they're looking at correlation. So they're kind of looking at a general trend, either prove a hypothesis or negate a hypothesis. And as they get more and more a proof or more a negative, they may then look at validity and say, okay, we need these attributes of the data set to be more valid than others. So it's very, very different in terms of how they look at it. And then lastly, we look at traceability. It's clear today that more often than not, people want to know where's the data coming from. And it's a huge, simple way for us to prove that they can trust it because they know based on experience, the data coming from the ERP is much more accurate than maybe the data coming from, an Excel file, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. So thank you for that. The first question we've had through here is, what's your advice for navigating the attitude of that's IT's problem? I like that question. What would you say to that?
That's a great question. I think the first thing is figuring out the impact on the business outcome. And I think Domino's is a great example of where they have done some amazing things. So if you really get in deep with Domino's, they did a lot of study. What they realized is that if they take a pizza order, it would be 4 times more profitable to take an order over any digital media than taking it over the telephone. So they will take orders over the telephone, but for them, it was a case of saying, if we could figure out how to get more customers to use Twitter, email, app, even inside a game, like a PlayStation game, they could be 4 times more profitable for delivering the exact same product and more accurate because they'd get a real accurate like GPS location or a location where they're supposed to deliver the pizza. So I think the key thing here is looking at what's the business trying to get to, and do they have a really good understanding of the outcome they're trying to achieve? Because then IT's job is to say, is understood, we will work on getting you the most accurate, trustworthy data to solve that problem. And then it becomes a true partnership. And I think if you could, again, the trust score establishes that conversation. Because if they're willing to invest with IT to solve the problem, they may get into certain things that we did. Example at Talend was IT doesn't know our customers. Let's just be clear. They don't know the business. They may appreciate the business, but they're the IT team. But the sales team or the business teams, they do know their business. They really understand very accurately the relationships between customers and regions and all sorts of things. So if everybody had a score that they could say, you know what, guys, we have a 60% confidence in our data right now. The only way we're going to fix this is if you could literally spend some time as an account executive in the 20 accounts that you have in your region, fixing up these 7 to 10 attributes. We reckon it'll take you 20 minutes to do this next Monday. Could you help? You span that across 1,000 AEs or salespeople in your organization. All of a sudden by Tuesday, you now have basically 75%, 80% confidence in your data. So it's about establishing those rules between business and IT and having a measurable way to get there. And our experience is that sales, business will play with IT, but you've got to have a measured outcome and a success to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another couple of questions here that I'm actually going to combine into one. So I hope that's okay with the people who submitted them. So the first one is, how do you put a euro or a pound or a dollar value on trusted data? And I would link that to the next question, which is here, which is, how do you get executive buy-in to data ownership? And I suppose if you can put that dollar or pound or euro figure on the data trust, then that may well help with the buy-in, which is why I've combined them. So I don't know how you want to tackle those two together, Ciaran, but I'll leave that up to you.
It's a super question. I was asked the other day, and I'm not sure if hopefully it's related. I was asked the other day about things like pricing of certain parts of, a general question. It wasn't to do with Talend. It was a friend of mine asking me, like, how do you think about pricing? And you get into strange things like, well, if I can count physically like the user, it's kind of easy to say, well, here's a user, and I've got 20 people in this organization. But then some people get into things like, well, it's not user-based. It might be based on the amount of, data processing or something like that. And they're going to go, well, that's customer-specific and use case-specific, so you got to do some sort of testing. That's hard. So what people end up doing is they kind of put together a ready reckoner. They go, well, if you have a terabyte of data on Amazon.com, it's going to cost you this. If you have 2 terabytes or 3 terabytes, it's going to cost you that. Now, how you get to 1 terabyte or 2 or 3 is really up to you. But you have indicative kind of costs. And I think if you look at this type of problem, there's no absolutes. Now, Gartner has basically got this thing called the power of 10, which is every time you find a data problem at a stage, it's $10 to fix it. So if it's is it $10 to fix it? It costs you $10 to fix each one of those data quality issues, the best way to frame it. But for every one you don't fix, it's going to be 10x on the next stage of the pipeline. It's now $100. So the story goes is that you pull in data from Salesforce.com into your data warehouse. It's going to cost you $10 for every problem that you found. If you allow that problem to persist and now it goes into your Tableau report or Looker or Click, it's now $100. Then if you don't fix it there and then some business person makes a decision to go invest in Canada, it now becomes $1,000 a problem. So there are ready reckoners. However, what a lot of our customers have done through experience is they can go to each exec and they can calculate that. Is it $10? Is it $12? Is it $30? And they can use specific examples to do it. But again, back to why I started with the pricing example. If you knew that it was 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 20 errors in the data, how much easier would it be to go and say, I'm going to estimate that each one of these errors costs us $10. You might go, I disagree with you, Ciaran. I think it's going to be $20. All right. So James, we have 1,000 errors in our contact database for our email campaign. You're telling me it's $20 per each one of these, or £20. Well, 20 by 1,000 is $20,000. It's going to cost us $20,000 in negative spend for this campaign. And guess what? The campaign is supposed to be a $5,000 spend. So knowing the number of errors, knowing your trust score allows you to attribute a dollar value. And even the simple act of you and me arguing over, is it higher or lower, like the way you play a game, will at least we'll agree on one thing, the magnitude of the problem. And that's the essence of this. And then you can begin to track it, trace it, and it's clear using Gartner's ready reckoner numbers, it is at least $10 per stage, and it has a multiplicative effect every time you don't fix it.
Absolutely. And you want to avoid that exponential rise, and you want to deal with it, identify it, deal with it, rectify the issue rather than allow it to grow exponentially.
Most definitely. And on the analytics side versus the operational side, it's a multiplicative effect. Like solving a problem where somebody sees a Tableau report that's got errors, hopefully you catch it, you fix it the next day. Shipping the wrong parcel to your entire, customer base, during the Christmas period, you may never recover from that in terms of reputational loss. So operational ones are exponentially more expensive if the data is bad. You hope that you can recover from bad analytics because somebody in the room goes, that doesn't look right. You don't get that luxury with e-commerce websites. The parcel has shipped and may have gone to the wrong customer. That's reputational loss, and that's a massive amount of cost to the company.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we are almost at time, so I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. If we didn't have a chance to get to your question and you'd like to follow up with Ciaran, then I'm sure he'd be happy to connect with you on LinkedIn and continue the conversation there. So please do reach out if you would like to. I'll just finish again, Ciaran, saying thank you very much for the presentation and for taking part in the Q&A there. Thank you.
Thank you.